Well, welcome everyone. And again, my name is Richard Taylor with ID8 Software, and we have a great lineup of people this evening. So I'm just going to go here to the next slide. And so my quick background, myself, I'm located near Boston. My degree or my background is in architecture, and I have over 21 years of Revit experience. Do you want to say hello, Sash?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Really appreciate your time, and I'll be here to field the questions and enjoy the discussion today.
All right, and yeah, and Sash is located on the West Coast near Portland, Oregon. And Holger, I'm going to have you do a little intro.
Yeah, so yeah, my name is Holger de Groot. I'm the CEO and founder of Modmation and also a certified BIM manager. And I basically provide BIM and digital engineering consulting services to our clients within the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. And beside my work as a consultant, I'm also an executive member of Building Smart Australasia and a seasonal lecturer at the University of New South Wales.
Thank you. And Maciej?
Hi, I'm Maciej Wypych. I work together with Holger at Modmation. I also have a background in architecture and basically take care of all the automation and new technologies at Modmation.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Brian, would you like to say a few quick words?
I'm Brian Mackey. I'm a consultant based out of Denver, Colorado. I started BD Mackey Consulting back in 2011. Been in this, I never had a job that wasn't in the AEC industry, so I've been doing that pretty much my entire life, and I'm here for everybody's Revit consulting needs.
All right, thanks, Brian. And Sheena, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheena Shook. I am located in Hawaii. I'm on the big island of Hawaii. I'm not currently dealing with the snow that's several thousand feet taller than me. I am the Director of Business Development at Modulus Consulting. We're a BIM consulting group. We're based out of San Francisco. We have offices spread across the U.S. And you know, we support people sort of through the spectrum, design, engineer, construction, in their use of building information modeling and the information and data that we all know and love these days. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Sheena. Well, and I want to put this up just so everyone has the names, while we talk and I ask questions. And again, these four individuals all are consultants with Revit, consultants in AECO. And so they've got a wealth of knowledge. I mean, they're working with Revit every single day. So what I'd like to do is just start with some questions and hopefully facilitate some of the dialogue. So the first question goes out to Holger, and I'm starting from the Australia, New Zealand, and Asia time zones, and we'll move east toward the United States eventually. So Holger, I was one of the registration questions that people had asked, and I thought this was a really good one, is what are some of the greatest challenges that you see with technology and BIM right now? And maybe even specifically talk about the challenges specifically in Australia and New Zealand, since that's your geography.
Well, what we see with most companies, they already have a good understanding that when you implement BIM, in particular when you have new technologies and processes that you would like to optimize, that you need a balance between those. What most of the companies miss is the important part of the people themselves. Like, people are those who work with the tools, who work with the process, and without them, nothing is really going to happen in the project. So the challenge usually starts when people have not been trained or have a lack of the right mindset to change the way they work, changing existing process by using new technologies or using more advanced BIM tools and add-ons. And in particular, when you start working on a BIM mandated project, during the process of your digital project delivery, the quality and also the providing the deliverables, the client will see in your deliverables where the flaws are, because there is a lack of understanding, there is a lack of training and education. So what I see as a great challenge, or what I witness as a great challenge when it comes to technology and BIM, is in the education and training sector, that's where both academia and industry, both of them, they need to provide more opportunities for those who want to become BIM managers or digital engineers, providing the training and education they need so that they can then start to develop the skills, the knowledge, the experience that they need and that they can apply throughout their career.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, you saw the introductions. All of us, I think, had at least somewhat architecture degrees background. I mean, when I went to school, which was quite a while ago, I mean, there was no real technology classes at the time. But would anyone else like to talk about some of the challenges that they're facing within the technology and BIM sort of ecosystem?
I think for me, the biggest problem is people think they know what BIM is, but they really don't. BIM, to most people, BIM is a product. Oh yeah, we do BIM, we have Revit, we draw lines in Revit, but we do BIM because we use Revit. And I think a lot of people out there, even still to this day, don't understand that it's an information model, and that information can be a plethora of sources. I mean, the biggest information modeling tool out there is Excel, right? I mean, if we can make that data from Excel, extract back and forth, or use Excel as our interpreter from program A to program B, it's still the information we're looking for. And that's the big thing to me, that people just don't think like, oh yeah, I got a Revit model, I'm doing BIM, and that's what drives me the biggest crazy on a daily basis.
Yeah, I've seen so much being published that Revit does not equal BIM, or BIM does not equal Revit, either way. That's like, it is a whole huge ecosystem with lots of different products, technology, processes, and so forth. So yeah, that's great. Well, Maciej, I was curious, since we're talking about some of these technologies and training, what trends or technology or workflows do you see gaining traction in the next couple of years?
I think one of the biggest things is going to be a move towards web applications. I think you can see that Autodesk is heading this way already. They're trying to push everything onto Forge, and I think the next step is going to be trying to move some of their applications into web applications instead of having the desktop ones. So hopefully Revit will run in the browser at some point, but it's going to be years from now. But I think that's the.
I've been waiting for a long time.
Yeah, but I think that is the trend that will follow, and this is going to be helpful for all these companies like Autodesk, because they will be able to deliver new versions of software continuously, and also for the users, because you won't be restricted to use PC. You'll be able to use Mac or any other platform. So I think that will be great, and I think that there's going to be lots more coming in the next few years into web applications, and definitely utilizing the cloud, like cloud applications like Forge and similar, will definitely have a big impact on the market, and there's a lot more big players coming out of other industries coming into AEC. They're trying to push their cloud solutions into the market, and there's going to be more connections between those applications. I think one of the things that Autodesk has already started with Forge, they now allow to connect your BIM Collaborate Cloud with Office, and like with certain webhooks and things like that. So I think that there's going to be a lot of activity in that front.
Yeah,
and
certainly.
Just want to add one thing that Brian mentioned, that Excel is a big part of AEC industry, and I think the biggest boost in productivity would be to teach people how to use Excel instead of teach how to use Revit, because I've seen so many architects doing really nice looking tables in Excel, but they're just useless. You can't extract any data out of it because they draw lines in Excel just to make them look good, instead of actually using Excel properly.
Interesting. Well, it's funny, at the Built conferences, quite a few years, Ideate Software has run several classes on Excel and how to use Excel in the AEC industry. So hopefully we were ahead of the times there. So any follow-up on like new technologies? Like Sheena, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's interesting. So the things that you guys are kind of all talking about is a result of this evolution of digitizing our workflow, right? And back in AutoCAD days, it was kind of digitizing, but we're drawing 2D lines. And right now, we're sort of riding that wave of people really adapting their workflow and truly digitizing their work in the way of using a parametric database, which is really what Revit is. And that's where, as soon as we start to get to that point, we're seeing all of the other opportunities, if you want to look at it that way. Some people look at it as challenges, but there's this opportunity now with all of this information that's available. And I think that some of the things that are trending, to talk about something slightly different than what Maciej mentioned, but some of the things that are trending is this knowledge and understanding and the value of this information that we used to have siloed or in books or manual, on our desktops. And digitizing that and bringing it into our environment, whether we're using Excel to get it in, or we're using tools like ID8 to get it out. And then what do we do with that information? And that's understanding that, okay, now we've digitized our workflow, and now we need to standardize the information. And so there's tools that are coming out that are helping us do that. There's thought processes and codes and standards and that kind of stuff that everyone's starting to talk about to get us there. But to me, that's a rising tide for sure in the industry.
Well, this is actually a perfect transition. Again, this question came in from the registration questions, which I thought was really good. And that is, how do we efficiently deal with varying owner BIM requirements, which also, that's really standards. In fact, they have in parentheses, Omniclass versions, assignments. Do we need a specific standard? So that, and maybe you could expand on that a little bit more, since this person was asking about those types of BIM requirements.
Well, and that's a great question. And sometimes you run into that on one project where you have multiple standards that you have to deal with, especially if it's a public-private partnership. But the other times that you're dealing with it is you're setting up your own content, your library for Revit, and you're wondering, well, what standard should I be using? And so that can be challenging, but I think that the key thing is to think of it as information and to get in contact with and get educated on the tools that are out there that can help you do lookup tables like in Excel that help you do a crosswalk between owner standards, because that's still, especially in the US, we don't have one standard. Most major universities have their own standard. The federal government, even the different agencies, they have standards that are slightly different, especially when it comes to the data that they have, the way that it's structured, the way that they name their content for operations and CAPM and stuff like that. So the key there is, I think, to get up to speed on the tools that you can use to crosswalk between different standards, have those conversations early with owners, and let them know that there are these other standards that are out there, especially if you're working on federal projects. Make sure you got dialed in on which one you want to use. Talk about that stuff early with your stakeholders. But the things to do between the varying standards is definitely looking at the data and seeing how you can move back and forth with automation and data tools, that crosswalk approach, in my mind. So if we're talking about Omniclass or we're talking about Uniclass, whichever one you're talking about, those classification systems, that's what I'm specifically talking about there.
Well, I'm going to do a little plug here because we have ID8 Software has, we have several individuals in the UK, but we have a new sales person and a new technical person that are in the UK, and they're really they've been talking a lot about standards. And in fact, they were just interviewed by BIM Thoughts, which is a podcast that people may know about. It's going to be releasing next Tuesday, which is the 14th of December. So watch for that, BIM Thoughts. And I'll just say that the whole conversation is really about standards and adhering to certain BIM standards. Specifically, in their case, they're talking about the UK standards, but we also talked about Singapore standards and South Africa and some of the countries that have had a big influence, I think, from the sort of global English empire. So it was really interesting to hear their take on standards. So I'll throw that little plug in there as well.
Well, and I even think standards get a little bit farther than that too, because with a lot of companies becoming international, you have to be able to address these standards. And the other thing I think is with a lot of more people attending conferences, etc., one of the things that cracks me up on that too is some people will put two standards together, like, oh, I want the UK standard and the American standard. It's like, these are not the same things, so a lot of times you get these things, you've got to interpret what people are trying to say from their standards. or people just have outdated standards. I literally worked on a project about 6 months ago where the deliverable, according to their contract and the standards, was ink on Mylar. That's still their deliverable in their
Really?
in their
Wow,
document.
that's amazing. Is it like in DWG
Yeah, and
format
that'll
after that?
happen.
So I just don't think, I mean, when you pull a CAD manual out and the CAD manual has an old compact Presario from the 80s on the cover of the CAD manual, you know you're screwed. But
Well, this is a great question, kind of a follow-up question, Brian. We were talking about this earlier, and I thought you had some good thoughts on this. Is, there are different, when you think about standards per se, kind of, let's move on to, there are different standards of models, right? There's the contractor's model, there's the architect model, the design model. So this was another question that came up is, whose model is ultimately the end deliverable? And from your experience, could maybe you talk a little bit about that, these different models, the construction model, the as-built model, the design model, and so forth?
yeah, I think this is the one big thing to me that whenever I sit down, I start off in a BIM meeting with whatever, for me, a lot of times it's airports or courthouses or whatever, and they're always like, well, we need an as-built model, and they have a definition of what that as-built model is. And first off, it's not a model. We all know we're not going to put an entire airport into a single file and have anybody on the planet be able to open that file. But it's more of the question of what does that mean? Because if you start reading through a lot of these BIM execution plans and a lot of documentation, they're always like, well, the end model is what was built. And I think in their minds, a lot of times it's, oh, we're going to take those design models. The designers are going to go through and update, oh, the wall moved 6 inches, the duct was off by a foot, and they're going to update their design models. But then if you start reading their level of development, level of detail, depending where you are in the world, they're like, oh, but we've got to model the duct work every splice. So sure, a designer puts in a 200-foot run of duct work, fabricator models that an 8 to 10 foot, 2 to 3 meter sets of pipes. And it's kind of like, okay, that's cool, but what are they looking for? If I'm going off of what their documentation says, I'm handing over that construction model. They also sometimes say they want LOD 450. Oh, great. I don't think you really needed all the bolts connecting all of the little things together, but that's what you're telling me the design model needs. So a lot of times for me, it's breaking that down. And on several of our projects, it's been kind of a, hey, we'll take the structural model and we'll give the concrete from the structural model. That model will go to them as the as-built record model, whatever they're calling it. And then the steel will come from the fabricators because the steel has a little bit more information. So a lot of times it ends up breaking down to be this weird hybrid of they're getting all these different models to be that as-built model. But it's never, ever set up in stone. And a lot of times it depends on who you're working with. So current project we're working on, the contractor made all the fabricators give their deliverables in Revit. They're like, hey, it says the as-built model, even though technically that's falling on the design team, we're going to have all of our people do it so we can in turn make those Revit models, their fabrication models done in Revit as the end deliverable. Now there still has to be a lot of communication because we might have to put that information in the design model that they'll need to transfer that data across. And it's like Sheena said, we've got to have some sort of integrated thing where, hey, we can take data from this one and push that data over into this model and work with some of those tools going across there. So that's always a big one for me is what is that end deliverable? What do you truly need? Do you really need an LOD detail 450 on a chair when I've looked at every single one of facilities management and it's a young cylinder with a block icon saying this is a chair? So there's a lot of that thing is what do they technically mean by an end deliverable model?
Well, we've kind of heard both from Sheena and from Brian in the USA. For Holger and Maciej, is there any difference about delivering different kinds of models when it comes to New Zealand or Australia?
Well, I would say so. I mean, first of all, when it comes to what do you have to deliver at the end of the project, the first question is, what is your contract? What is your contract form? Am I an IPD project? Am I just having a contract that is just the design stage? Is the client the contractor or is that the owner? And that would be the first question. What kind of contract do we have? So I have a clear understanding what I am as a consultant being on the hook for, and what do I have to deliver and what do I not have to deliver? Because there's quite often a misunderstanding also among teams who has to deliver what. And we need to keep in mind that in some situation, the BIM execution plan is not a contractual document. It's just a formal document that needs to be backed up by the contract. And if the contract is missing it, it could be that I'm not delivering any of those, even so people think I have to.
Yeah, good point. Well, I think I'd like to put Sash on the spot here, and I want to. We've gone through at least one question for each panelist, and we've talked with some dialogue. So, Sash, are there follow-up questions or specific questions that you think the panelists should answer?
Yeah, here's actually an interesting comment that came in from Simon. And I think this is a good one that kind of dovetails into the LOD discussion here, but here's the comment. So as for deliverable, no one discusses about the archive model. Can people assure that the Revit model built with an LOD 350 or higher is able to open in 10 to 20 years from now? I've run into the issue where you cannot open the model built 10 years ago until you fix a problem from the software from 10 years ago. It's the Achilles heel. So PDF and DWG seem to be a safer bet. Anybody want to take that on? I think it's an interesting comment for sure.
I'll take that one on because I literally had this discussion last week with one of my clients' contracts. So it was an airport project, and they're being all again like this. Hey, you've got to do this. You've got to set this up. You've got to give these deliverables to us. And I know for them, the majority of the reason why they want it is they are taking that, going into the GIS software that they're using, so they're exporting out all the data, all the 3D model itself. So that's going to live in a web-based platform, like we mentioned before, like Maciej mentioned before, is it's going to be in their GIS data. But the other thing they want for it, and half the reason they're saying is, hey, if we remodel the space in 10 years, we want somebody to open it. And I sat there bringing up this exact comment because yes, we might be able to go model that you open this up in 10 years. More than likely you won't. So sitting down with those people saying, you've got to make sure that if this is truly what you want, you are keeping up to the date on the latest version of the software. I don't care what that is. And you're making sure that you have somebody on staff who will go and open all of those and see if those things upgrade. Because yes, if I drop the file that I first started in Revit in 2004, probably not going to open in 2022 Revit. Right? It's just not going to do it. There's going to be so many busts. And if I have a file that old anyways, there's so many things that didn't exist that just can't happen. It will blow up. So that is a great point that you have to bring in is if these people are saying this is the deliverable and it's not just for a one-time import into their data management software. If it's, hey, we want to have it for future remodel projects, then they need to understand that somebody on staff has to have all these pieces of software. I don't care if it's Revit, I don't care if it's AutoCAD, it might be Civil 3D, whatever they're using, somebody has to have the latest version of that and constantly every year making sure it opens.
What about using a file format like IFC? What do you think about that as a deliverable? Or are there other, maybe instead of RVT, the Revit file format, are there other formats that might be more suitable? I know you mentioned, or I think Sash mentioned PDF or DWG. Are there others?
I would say IFC is definitely the one to go for kind of long-term reliability, because it's an open standard and you'll be able to open it with multiple pieces of software. So that's definitely benefits. It's not perfect though. There's a lot of things that break as always, but often it's actually the reason for all these breaking is on the side of the authoring software like Revit, ArchiCAD, or any other, where they fail to export things to IFC correctly, and also on the user, where they fail to classify things correctly whilst exporting. But I think that's definitely, all these open standards, file formats will be much better than relying on an authoring software standard like Revit file, because we don't know what's going to happen with Autodesk, and even if let's say Autodesk goes bankrupt tomorrow, they're going to stop doing any updates, and you won't be able to open Revit in 10 years time. But IFC, because it's open standard, you always will be able to get the data out of it.
Yeah,
so I think having the original file is good, but you always should have an IFC file as a kind of the key deliverable. The Revit file is just there if you want to, make any changes in the next year or two. But we had a project, for example, where the client came back to us and said, "Oh, we need to make some changes to the model because the contractor is asking for, updating their as-built model." And it was in Revit 2016. We don't have a version for Revit 2016 anymore, and we can't get a license for it, so we weren't able to even help them. So that's also the limit, and often what happens in Australia, unfortunately, there's a fixed Revit version assigned to the deliverable, where you have a project that will last like 6 years, and then at the end, like, how are we going to deliver that? The licenses are expiring. You can't really do anything anymore. So I think you always have to have a backup and have that connection with the open file format like IFC, because that's definitely going to last longer than Revit file.
Sheena, it looks like you wanted to say something.
Well, I thought it was interesting too, right? So we're kind of talking about a couple of different things. If we as consultants deliver an as-built model to an owner, that owner needs to have an idea of what they're going to do with their as-built content that they have in the next 10 to 20 years. If they're never going to open it again, they have to have a plan for that, right? If they're not going to open it for 20 years, let's talk about that and let's figure out what the plan is. Realistically, if someone has gone through the effort and paid for an as-built model, they see some value in it. They want to use it downstream. So they're going to need to have somebody in their ear or on their staff that's telling them what to do, how to keep that data as live as possible, because old data is dead data, right? We all know that. But this notion about, well, what format do we put it in and what's the longevity of that format? 20 years from now, if you don't have as-built drawings, some robot's going to go out there and scan it for you and then model it for you, okay? So, let's not worry about it too much, because there'll be an algorithm, somebody will make it, and they'll model it from the point cloud, and some robot dog will have gathered it in the middle of the night. So, and maybe that's cheaper than keeping somebody on staff for the next 20 years to just open the file in the latest Revit version and keep migrating it once a year. So I think the thing for me is gather your data with intention, deliver your data with intention, ask those questions. What's your framework on your side? What are you guys going to do with it? And just be sure you're asking those questions often to people on the owner side and your other teammates if you're on the design side, and ask those questions to the GC. And just be as informed as you can about other people that are potentially going to be using this information and what their goal is, what their expectations are, how they're going to use it. And, we're all pretty intelligent people. We'll make the right decision as long as we're, collaborating with our team members.
Yeah, that's really a good point, to ask the right questions. And I like your comment about what's going to be used in 20 years. And like you said, it may be actually cheaper for just drones to fly in there and do a point cloud and scan it all rather than to upgrade it. But we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty, I guess, right now. Well, we're talking about different projects, and I thought, Holger, we'll go back to you. And can you tell us about a recent project that maybe you and Maciej worked on as far as with your consulting business, or maybe something that was specifically with extracting data, or, what were some of the challenges around extracting some of that data, and what were the clients looking to review?
Well, we're currently working for a contractor on one of the flagship projects, as they call it. The project is called One Sydney Harbour. It's one of the biggest projects we currently have in Sydney, if not the biggest. And we are the appointed digital engineering delivery manager. So that's basically what we called on this project. And we manage, supervise, and report on coordination processes, and in particular, the quality of all incoming models and data. And our responsibility is also including to audit the models that are being exchanged, and to ensure that the correct parameters or the shared parameters that have been set up by the clients are being used, and basically ensuring that those parameters produce meaningful output, so that the information that is attached to the models directly or indirectly with third-party add-ons is being attached to the right parameter, and the information itself is correct. And by correct, I mean the form of it. Of course, we can't tell in terms of like fire resistancy, is this at 30 or 60, which one is correct. For us, it's more about does it fall into the range of numbers of the format that is being looked for, and also have all those parameters being filled with the information that the client wants to. And in this particular situation, they're looking for the data that is being used for asset management at the end of the project. So they really are looking forward that the models have all the information that at the end of the day can be field verified. So this information is then basically as built and can then be exported in what format of whatever it might be, IFC or any other form of database, and can be exported to the tools that they are using for the operation and maintenance of those buildings. And we're automating a lot of things when we do those audits. We try to automate as much as possible, but we're also using a lot of out-of-the-box tools or add-ons like ED8 software, BIM Link, ED8 Explorer, because those tools are already doing a great job to make it easier for us to look for the data that we need to check, and also to review it and to find the issues that we need to fix collaboratively with the team.
Well, that's, you know, I was going to ask Maciej, I said, what kind of digital tools are you using? But I think Holger kind of summarized, unless you want to add a little bit to that, Maciej.
Well, you know, definitely we do use ID8, and I'm not just saying because it's an ID8 session, but it's definitely a great tool for us to have in our toolbox, because we do audit a lot of models and we need to make sure that the data is correct, and you know, having that ease of exporting what we need to Excel and just checking there, because you know, Excel is the better tool to actually, you know, go through a lot of data points instead of doing that all in Revit. Well, you know, we of course we do use Dynamo and other things. We do use PyRevit, so it's a great tool as well. But definitely, we also have some tools that we develop for ourselves, and we focus a lot on that to make sure that we automate what we can, and often it can be just very project specific. And but you know, I think overall, just as an advice to everyone, it's like you have to pick the best tool for the job, and you know, there's plenty of different plugins for Revit, or you know, any other pieces of software out there, but you know, there's not one that will do everything. So you know, you can use one that's really great in one thing, but then you know, there'll be other tools that'll be better at other things. So you know, there's just not one silver bullet that will solve every problem. But yeah,
I wish there was, but there never is. Well, and this is again a great question that came in from the registration, and so Sheena, I think this is nice, and it's building upon some of the things we were talking about with data extraction from the model. Is, you know, this person wrote, what are some of the most important key performance indicators that either architects, general contractors, owners would like to visualize from their data out of a BIM model?
Well, I think if most of the folks on the call are architectural designers, they're probably pretty familiar with those KPIs in terms of that's more model health kind of questions that architectural teams and BIM managers at architectural firms are keeping an eye on and looking for. With general contractors, I mean, what we're talking about here is risk management, schedule management, budget, RFIs. You're talking about the actual construction progress, even pre-construction coordination. I mean, those are the high-level things, and there are some pieces of information that they're tracking, you know, 7 levels down in those. And some of them, if we're talking about coordination, who owns the clash? When was it assigned? How long has it been open? Some trends about, on average, who's clearing clashes and how often. I think with owners, we're talking about operational data to some degree, right? The stuff that we all kind of already know and love, the Cody stuff, the asset data. But more and more, owners are moving into a wider realm of looking for information. And I think the most recent exposure I had with that was a client came to us, and they're duly headquartered, right, in San Francisco and in Sydney, Australia. And they're looking at, the data that they're gathering is utilization of their space, how often, how many people, getting people access to that space online, digitally, to be able to look at through a camera. Is somebody in that room? They want to know if that room's already occupied, when the schedule is. And they want access to these pieces of information sort of cross-platforms, right? They want one access point to be able to look at information from 7 different data sources. And how do you track that? How do you have those conversations with owners? How do you even talk about, well, where does that information belong? Does it even belong in the BIM model? Yes or no? And let's ask those questions. But owners, the ones that are out there that are really comfortable with data and information and software development, those guys are out there on the bleeding edge asking those questions now and solving some of those problems now. But those KPI pieces of information change depending on who you're talking to in the project lifecycle. And at the end of the day, the owner doesn't necessarily want every KPI that the designer or the GC was tracking. And so that's where, again, it's really critical to know who you're talking to, what their expectation is, the information that they're going to use, and how they want to use it in order to sort of frame, well, which tool should I be using and where should that information be stored?
Exactly. Now, and just thinking about that, Brian, I know you had mentioned that you were working with some clients with airports. Maybe I kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but is there a specific, key performance indicator that like an airport authority would be interested in tracking as far as information, or has that come up at all?
It doesn't usually come up too much from the model itself because they have workflows put all in place already, mostly due to TSA requirements. Like most people don't know, at least in the United States, that the second you go through security, you are identified with it's an RGB value code based off of the clothing you have on, your hair color, everything, and you are tracked through an entire airport. So most of them, they have that live data through software and through other tools. They're not really expecting that stuff necessarily from all of the information that you're going to give them, the BIM information you're going to give them. However, with that said, they are interacting that stuff with the floor plans, etc. And that's why on a lot of projects like that, they do want those 3D models so they can actually design this and say, hey, these cameras are there, so they can interact that behind the scenes. But that's usually security. Architects don't get to know that kind of thing type scenario as you get into it. So they are using a lot of those things. But again, different than what we're looking for there. I think for me, mostly, a lot of times that's just data that the companies themselves want to know how are we performing on our projects, we can do better, or did we price this project, accordingly, et cetera. So I think for me, that's more usually comes from the, not necessarily the owner side, but the design side. Hey, how are we doing our workflows? How are we benefiting from that?
Excellent. Sash, I'd like to go back to you to see if there are some other questions, just based on any of the discussion that we've had before I move on to some other questions.
Yeah, actually, there's a really great one here from Bridget that I think falls in line for sure with this conversation here. So the question is, what is the general consensus on inheriting a project and model at schematic design? Our project managers continue to assume that we can use the inherited model. However, because it is not using our components, we advise them to anticipate needing to remodel or swap all components after being transferred into their template. I think this is an awesome question. So who wants to take that one on? Brian?
I think Sash knows how I feel about this one.
Yes.
95% of this one always depends on the model you're getting and where it came from, right? How accurate those people, it was schematic design. When I always look at stuff like this too, depending on when you're getting it, sometimes I always say no one would ever take a napkin sketch and try to convert that in AutoCAD or in the pencil days and make that their final documentation, right? A lot of people, when they're in the preliminary design or even schematic design, they're just throwing ideas on paper and you've got to interpret those. Personally, for me, depending on who it comes from, with most of my clients who end up being the architect of record or the engineer of record, usually they're better off to just throw that away, consider it a napkin sketch, and start over. With that said, I did get one model from a client with one of them like, man, this thing is brilliant. It doesn't have all your stuff in it, but we can work with the standards that they had and the tools that they were using. But most often than not, I get grid lines that aren't 90-degree angles to each other. And it's not because of as-built conditions. It's just poor modeling and people like, man, we've got a deadline. Let's book this out the door. So for me, 90% of the time, I would say it's usually beneficial in a firm to just throw it away, start over, because you know your standards, you don't know the other standards. You're efficient with what you do. You have schedules and processes set up to your stuff. And if you try to bring that into somebody else's, you just end up fighting it the entire life cycle of the project. So my personal opinion is, yeah, most of the time you're going to throw it away and start over.
Yeah, I think it's hard.
Link it in and batch copy monitor.
Yeah, yeah. Autodesk has this vision of like start with Format, and then move it into Revit, or even you could just say SketchUp. Start with SketchUp, move it into Revit, and it doesn't really work that way, at least from my experience or talking to customers or clients. I don't know. From the Australia side of things, either Holger or Maciej, do you have any comments on either using something schematically or rebuilding it?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Brian. Definitely just do it, from scratch, because you can't rely on the quality of that model, because if you don't know who actually done it. And it's a good exercise also to understand design better and making sure that it actually works, because in that early stages, as Brian said, people are just throwing ideas on paper and then often focusing on actually having nice looking drawings instead of reliability and constructability of a project, and then often you have this kind of what's called here sky hooks, things like that, pieces of architecture that are just floating in the air because no one actually thought how it's going to be fixed to anything, or it's going to be supported by anything. So I would always go and remodel that, because you can't rely on this information at all. And also it will be in a different template. You have to spend a lot of time adjusting that template to fit with your standards and the way of your way of working. And you may also have some tools that fit in your way of working that you won't be able to use that within someone else's model, because they don't have the same parameters. They don't have things are modeled differently, and yeah, always start from scratch.
Well, this is in some ways kind of a connecting point. Is I was looking at this question that also came in from the registration, and maybe Maciej, I'll throw this to you. Is since you were just talking about that, but if not just the model, but how do you convince company decision makers that are removed from the whole technical workflow? And that may be from schematic, design in like SketchUp or Format to a Revit, and then the whole process of building multiple models in Revit. But if these decision makers are typically, high level principals of either a firm or a company, that they're removed from this whole technology, how do you express the value to them, and how can you express that it can be great? I know it's a really big question, but someone had put that in there, is how do you convince these company decision makers about this process that it's valuable?
Well, I think it's always important to adjust the language that you speak to those kind of people. You have to talk about money. You can't just talk about, okay, this tool has a great feature, will allow me to do that. They don't care. It's just how we're gonna save $100,000. And you have to spend $5, but we're gonna save 100. So they will sign the check straight away. If you're gonna start, focusing on the technical details, you're lost. You just can't do it. And so it is difficult often for people like me. I'm definitely focused on the technical side, but when we talk to clients, I always have to kind of switch my mindset to this kind of way of thinking. Right? This is just money and time, and that's how you get the project done. And I think it's very important to have that little switch there and to adjust yourself to this way of thinking. because they will all only focus on time and money, and yeah, that technical stuff will just go away.
Well, like you said, showing the value and the money, that's always a huge thing for any owner, right? It's important.
Yeah, and often, sorry, just one more thing, and often even internally to when you talk to a team that is working on a project, just saying, okay, you can use this feature and it's going to be so much better for you. It's not going to have the same traction unless you actually show them. So often you have to spend quite a bit of time to give them a good example, and maybe do a video. Okay, this took me like 2 hours to do the way you're doing it right now. But if we do it this way, it's going to be, I don't know, half an hour, let's say. So you have to spend that time, but it will actually bring you a lot of benefits, because without that, people are just not going to be convinced. You have to build that trust.
Yeah, personally for me, I've always focused on the time aspect, because whenever you bring money in, somebody's like, I want to see charts, I want to see this, I want to see how I'm going to save that money, and they want the proof of the money saving. But if you say time, then they do that manual calculation in their head of, oh, well, we're saving 30 hours and we're billing at X rate, and they'll do that calculation in their head. So I focus personally on time. Hey, here's what time is going to cost you, or it's going to save you, and then let them focus on the money side. Personally, for me, I found that to be better.
Well, I was curious, this is kind of a follow-up question maybe for Sheena, is it in not just with like, let's say management, but just in general, how do you introduce more efficient workflows to a group that's very settled in their current workflows? So again, it's like, how do you show them the value of what you're proposing?
You're trying to get me to reveal the secret sauce recipe, I feel like, as a consultant. You're trying to get me to give away my secret. Well, I think that you have to start with understanding what other people care about, right? As a young BIM manager, I'd be like, oh, you guys, you have these standards, we have to produce to these, and they're like, yeah, but I got a deadline and I got to get this door fitted done, right? And they didn't necessarily. Everybody cares about their product. They care about what everybody's expectations and needs are. But there's this thing where you have to understand what's in their way first. And building that consensus and understanding and sort of trading needs is critical. I think for building rapport with your own internal team, it's critical as a consultant that other people feel like their needs are being heard and that you're addressing them and that you're acknowledging them. And teams that I think are kind of settled in your way, what you're really saying, because you're kind of saying that in a negative way, but what you're really saying is you've got a team that's got a workflow that works for them, and you're trying to get them to change their workflow, and how do you do that? And the only way to really do that and to get them to be as impassioned of a champion of this new workflow as you are it's just like what Maciej was saying. You have to spend the time. You have to build that consensus. And you do that on the first couple of things you need them to change. And then there's that trust and that belief that you're not just getting them to change their workflow for the sake of changing, but that it will benefit them if they spend the time to kind of understand what's different about it. But some of it also has to do with education, spending the time to bring their knowledge level up about the tool that they're using and the impact that it's having on their work and their teammates. And that usually is enough to get people motivated to adopt the change, but they need support as well, and you can't just leave people hanging, because at the end of the day, it's 11 o'clock at night, they're the only one in the office, they got to make something work. They can't feel like they're by themselves, right? Right. They're just going to change back to whatever they were doing before.
And as a software provider, we constantly have the challenge of people have our software tools that are installed maybe across their organization, but how do we get people to utilize them more? How do we, and it is like sort of on-demand training or snippets or videos and things. There's lots of different ways, but it's hard to, if someone's used to a certain way, hey, but you've got these tools that'll make it faster and better. How do we leverage those? And that's always a challenge for us as a software company. Well, I know that
we're assumed to be snake oil salesman first, Richard. Like
No.
you're telling me something that ain't. No, I can get this better over here. So we have to prove it to our people and our clients.
Well, I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I wanted to go back to Sash to see if, again, based on the last maybe few conversations, are there some other burning questions?
Yeah, well, I don't know if any of them are burning per se, but here's another good question here. In regards to BIM development, are there any insights on the efficacy of managing people versus managing processes, or how those two can overlap to the best effect?
Yeah.
That's always a tough one because everybody wants to feel like they're being part of this BIM development standards, but the more cooks you have in the kitchen, the more chances the kitchen's going to catch on fire. I mean, I work with several clients where there's a whole committee for BIM, and those clients, honest truth, almost nothing happens. But it's the ones that are just like, screw this, I'm a dictatorship, I'm the owner, I hired you, make some decisions and let's go. Usually people will go along with that in the long run, but it is harder to deal with it. It's just like Sheena was saying, you're trying to change people's standards, and some people feel like, oh, I invested all this time in this old way, and you're trying to tell me I suck and this new way is better. It's kind of the same process when you're talking about the whole BIM development. I usually try to pull in, and as stupid as it sounds, not necessarily the Revit modelers or the modelers, like other people who manage data. Hey, can we get your IT guy who has a SharePoint database or some sort of Access database, and can we get them starting to work with data and bring this in? And look, we're bringing in this data with this data, and you start pulling out some of these total bizarre people. Like, wow, we can really do so much more with this. That then everybody else starts to open up to not only just, hey, my way is the best way because I know it, but wow, look at these other tools we can do. So that's, to me, I mean, it is a hard thing to do, and it is the people management. And honest truth, not everybody has people management skills. I sometimes lack in those skills.
Well, and I was going to say, I think it's a hard question because each of you're working for consultants. You're not part of the organization, or you're at least somewhat, typically, you're hired as a consultant. You're not embedded into the organization. If I may be mistaken. Sometimes I think, like in Sheena with Modulus, you are embedded more. So maybe I'm saying that incorrectly, but you're not able to maybe impact the organizational change in the same way as if you were an employee or a manager of the company.
Sometimes it's a benefit because they see you come in as the expert, and not like the expert is in that YouTube video we've all seen with the red lines. You come in as an expert, so they take your word for it more so than the BIM manager they might have on staff, because that's just Joe who got promoted from the drafter level, right? So sometimes it is, I don't know, in my experience, sometimes it's been a benefit. They're like, oh, you're the expert, what should we do? As opposed to, I literally told you the same thing that your BIM manager told you last week, but you're listening to me. Cool. I love having that expert badge on sometimes. And again, other times, Richard, it is a pain. So I think it just depends on the firms you're working with.
Cool. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap this up pretty soon. I want to thank Holger, thank Maciej, thank Brian, thank Sheena. You're all fantastic. You've been really good on this panel discussion. I wanted to just briefly mention that Ideate Software, the sponsor of this panel discussion, we have 5 solutions that are built on top of Revit that help you manage your data very effectively. And some of the things that the panelists talked about with extracting information, going to Excel, using the power of Excel, we can certainly help you with that. And in fact, we do have a couple of promotions that are going on. If you're not familiar with Ideate Software, we have a 6-month single user promotion, but we also have a 6-month network license that allows you to share with your team. So I just wanted to mention that. All of that information is available on our website, and you can go to ideatesoftware.com to find more information. You can actually download a trial of any of our 5 solutions as well. So I want to thank my colleague Sash for helping me with questions. I really appreciate that. I can't thank the panelists enough. Holger and Maciej, I know you have to run in 2 minutes. Thank you so much for doing this presentation and also having to go back to another presentation. Sheena, thank you from Hawaii and the crazy weather that you've been dealing with. And Brian, I'm a little jealous just because it's been really nice and warm there, but I understand it's not the perfect condition for December. But thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.